On a cold September day, the Louisiana Shelter Home remained peaceful and lonely. Suddenly, there was a bang. The police charged into the shelter and arrested a frail, sickly, old, wheelchair-ridden man. The 72-year-old diabetic man with heart problems was cuffed and taken away by officers. But why? Why did the police want this wrinkled, frail man? There is no way he could be dangerous, right? He should be put in a hospital, not in lockup. But do not feel bad for this man just yet. This was no ordinary man. This was a man that held the world's darkest secrets. This was a man that affected many, many lives. That weak, ill man was Samuel Little. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we will be uncovering the case of Samuel Little. Keep on watching to uncover this man's grisly life story. If you think serial killers who have killed 20 or 30 victims are horrifying, then this man is hell incarnate. Samuel Little had confessed to the murder of 93 women in half the states of America. The FBI has verified around 50 of the 93 confessed murders by the serial killer, with many more pending final confirmation. This man had a 100-page arrest record, detailing crimes over 6 decades. This is the largest number of verified victims in American history of serial killers, making Samuel Little America's deadliest serial killer. Not only that, Samuel Little was the serial killer that went the longest without getting caught. Little was arrested a total of 100 times in his life, and he spent 10 years in prison. But even more shocking than these numbers are his confession. Samuel Little often had visitors in prison. He was generally a friendly man and called women baby. He even signed his letters with God bless. But whoever spent enough time with him got nightmares and could never go back from that. These visitors spent days being disturbed and frightened. A few conversations are all it took for the man to open up about his sinister life. He knew what the visitors came to hear, and he gladly gave it to them. Spooked yet? Grab your popcorn and snuggle in, because this is not going to be short. On June 7th, 1940, America's most prolific serial killer was born, Samuel McDowell, also known as Samuel Little. He had no easy childhood. Bessie Mae Little, Samuel's mother, was 16 years old when she gave birth to him. Not only was she young and poor, but she was also a prostitute. Other than sex work, Bessie Mae worked as a maid. 19-year-old Paul McDowell was Samuel's father. It doesn't really sound like the best of beginnings, does it? But that's not the worst of it. According to some sources, Bessie Mae Little gave birth to Samuel Little while she was serving time in jail. Samuel was abandoned by his teenage mother right after he was born. His mother left him on the side of the road to fend for himself. Luckily for Samuel, his grandmother took him in and moved him to Lorain, Ohio, where Samuel was eventually brought up. Samuel was already off to a rocky start and didn't have much hope in life. You wouldn't be far off if you were to guess this is where his hatred for women came in. His fear of abandonment, rejection, and anger with his mother, all of it was projected onto his victims. He took it all out on other female prostitutes as comeback for what his mother did to him. But again, it is just a theory. It may be true, or we may be way off. Anyway, let's continue with his early life. Samuel was raised by his grandmother in Ohio, where he started his school. He was admitted to attend Hawthorne Junior High School, but just like most of these cases, Samuel did not have an easy time in school. He rose to his life of crime pretty early on in life. Samuel committed his first crime in middle school. Samuel got in trouble in school for stealing and was sent to a reform school, especially for teenage boys in 1954. He had issues maintaining discipline in academics, with not less than 47 disciplinary reports against him. And so, eventually, he had to drop out of school. Even as a kid, Samuel was not a normal boy next door. This seemingly innocent kid had a mind brimming with sinister thoughts. He started developing fantasies or fetishes early on in his childhood. According to statements, Samuel's sexual fantasies involved strangling women, and that started when he was just a little boy. This fantasy seeded with him watching his kindergarten teacher touch her neck. Another incident that added to his fantasies occurred around the 3rd grade, where, as stated by Little, a young girl with bulging green eyes held a gaze with Little while touching her neck. According to Little's twisted mind, this girl knew his dark weakness and was taunting him by gazing at her neck. This incident was the focal point that gave birth to his obsession and fetish regarding choking and strangling women. Not only did he have terrifying fantasies, but he also showed interest in reading true crime stories. As a teenager, Samuel collected true crime magazines, especially those involving his favorite, depictions of choking and strangling women. Who knew this sexual fantasy of a young boy would end up being the root of trauma for 93 women and their family, costing those women their lives. Samuel also mentioned having difficulty looking at people's necks without a compulsion coming over him to hurt the person. Interestingly, Samuel could restrain this compulsion around his friends and family because, according to him, he loved those people and did not want them to be hurt. Therefore, he avoided looking at their necks altogether. Little mentioned that he chose his victims based on the attractiveness of their neck. Samuel committed his first crime as a 16-year-old teen. It started with minor theft. Samuel attempted to break an entry into a property in Omaha, Nebraska. In 1956, Little was thrown into juvenile detention for 4 years. That seems like a pretty long time, right? 4 years of life gone just like that. However, it did not seem to have the intended effect on young Samuel. After getting out of juvenile detention, Samuel was again arrested at 21, this time for burglary. Little had broken into a furniture store in Lorain and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. This was his first actual prison experience. Little was released from prison in 1964. He did not spare any crime, it seems. Samuel Little, for sure, seems destined to be a criminal. After his release in 1964, Samuel again got in trouble and got locked up for his theatrics. After that, his crime spree took new heights. He kept having frequent run-ins with the law. The serial killer did not live a static life, as he traveled a lot. From one state to another, he was everywhere. Samuel would frequently shoplift and was often noted selling goods from the trunk of his car. Little also claimed that during this time in prison, he took up boxing and referred to himself as a prize fighter. Samuel Little was arrested by police officers 26 times in 11 different states from 1957 to 1975. He was arrested for crimes including fraud, shoplifting, armed robbery, breaking and entering, driving under the influence, solicitation of a sex worker, aggravated assault, attacks on government officials, and sexual crimes. How was this guy ever free? That is certainly one of the most bizarre things about Samuel Little. The serial killer spent a big chunk of his life in and out of jail all over the country before he was even charged with murder. Surprisingly, during all of this hard time and all of these crimes, he had a constant romantic partner. Yes, that is shocking to us as well, seeing his urge to hurt people. So, let's see how they met. Little spent so much time in jails that he actually met his first longtime girlfriend there. Samuel Little came across Aurelia Jean Dorsey for the first time in late 1971. Samuel was arrested with his then-girlfriend Lucy Madero in 1971 when he robbed a gas station in Westlake while traveling to Cleveland from Florida. While Little was in jail awaiting his court hearing, he got charged with aggravated assault and sodomy. By the end of the year, Little's case started making headlines, while his girlfriend's case was overshadowed. The police and court forgot about Lucy's case, and she was left in a decrepit jail cell for 6 months without any charge. This gave her time to plan her way out. She stewed a plan to go against her boyfriend and told her cellmate, Jean, that she would be testifying against Samuel. The incident apparently struck a chord with Jean because she somehow managed to communicate with Little in jail and told him about his girlfriend's plan to bring him down. The prison was so decrepit that inmates could communicate through holes and cracks in the walls and ceiling. This gave Samuel the upper hand, and due to this piece of intel, Samuel's legal team was ready and able to beat the charge. This little loyal act by Jean kindled a feeling of admiration in Samuel. They got together even though Jean was 30 years older than Samuel. After that, the pair became inseparable till Jean's death. Samuel described Jean as no beauty and said that he admired her loyalty and her work and the lessons she taught him. This could have been an awe moment if this wasn't a documentary on America's deadliest serial killer. Gene was a true rock in Little's life, following him in every one of his endeavors. Gene stood by Samuel a little too much, accompanying and assisting him in his minor crimes. It was not just the killer's heart that she stole. Gene and Samuel would travel around and stay in sketchy motels while stealing and selling stolen goods for a living. Gene apparently taught him the art of shoplifting and was described as a master shoplifter by Little. The pair shoplifted thousands of dollars worth of electronics, clothing, and cigarettes from across the country. The couple often picked up accomplices. One of their accomplices, Danny Beckless, a 19-year-old boy, was arrested in connection with one of the thefts. While giving his statement to the police, Beckless stated that the couple would spend their days shoplifting, selling the stolen items, and then checking into cheap motels. When asked about any information about the suspected murders and sexual crimes, Beckless commented that Little never mentioned any women because Gene was his jealous partner. Little didn't talk about any ladies or nothing because Miss Dorsey was, you know, the jealous type, Beckless told the police. But when the men were alone, Little would brag. He'd say, you know, he'd like to take ladies' places and, you know, have sex with them and leave them. This was no ordinary couple, but the sort that was classified as the classic Bonnie and Clyde. Gene was never involved in any of his heinous murder crimes, and there is no source saying if she was or wasn't aware of them happening. Aurelia Jean passed away in 1988 due to a brain hemorrhage. Much to our surprise, his girlfriend died of natural causes and without any of his involvement. In the year 1982, in Pascagoula, Mississippi, Little was charged and arrested with the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose Lapre. The young woman had gone missing in the September of 1982. Somehow the jury declined to charge him with murder, and so the case never went to trial. The skeletal remains of the woman were later found in a Gautier cemetery. The police investigators were unable to tie Little directly to Lapre's murder. Lapre's brother stated that the higher-ups did not seem very interested in solving his sister's murder because sex workers and drug addicts are not believed in court. Lapre had often resorted to drugs in her life. So, while he was under investigation, Little was transferred to Florida to be brought to trial for, guess what? Another murder. Little was taken to trial for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount. Patricia's body was discovered in the same month, September. Patricia was a regular at the bar Maze Lounge, where she was last seen alive. Witnesses suggested that Little spent time with Mount on the night she vanished. However, to Little's luck or curse, the witnesses were not considered credible. Little was acquitted in January 1984, and the case was dropped. Little got to walk free and get away from yet another murder. We can sense a pattern here. The justice system has failed us here again and again. If he was put in prison for his first murder, 92 women could be roaming about freely, having a family and living an entire life. But fate obviously had other plans for them. During the investigation of the murder cases, 2 prostitutes came forward, confessing that Little had also assaulted them in 1980 and 1981. After getting acquitted in 1984, Little moved to California, where he lived near San Diego. The city is known for its climate, beaches, and wildlife, but obviously Samuel Little wasn't in San Diego for the tourist attractions. In October of 1984, Little was arrested yet again for assault, kidnapping, and strangling of a 22-year-old woman called Lori Barrows. She fortunately survived Little's physical advances and was one of the women that came forward and informed the authorities about Little's malicious act. Lori Barrows, the woman who is attacked by America's most prolific serial killer, opened up about her horrifying near-death experience. According to Lori, she was just on her way to work when Little attacked her from behind and put her in a headlock, while subsequently dragging her to his car. He pulled up behind me. I could hear something. I think I might have just frozen in place. Well, he'd already got out of his car and put me in a headlock and shoved me in his car. How insane is that? To think that nobody is safe at any time of the day. Anything can happen at any place and time. For her, It was just a normal routine day of heading to work. Never in her wildest thoughts did she imagine being dragged from the street. Truly chilling, but the worst is yet to come. After being bundled into the serial killer's car, she is then driven to an abandoned parking lot that was used as a trash disposal site, where he drags her to the back of the car by her neck, ties her hands behind her back, and forces himself onto her, kissing her. Lori, of course, tries pushing away, which enrages Little, and he starts choking her. While explaining the incident, Lori stated that Little started controlling her breathing, with his entire hand wrapped around her neck, keeping the thumb in the middle. During the attack, Lori realized that Little's intent was not to forcibly have sex with her, but to kill her. She started drifting in and out of consciousness. When she became conscious again, Little asked her to swallow. I can remember my shoes getting yanked off, and pretty much just him pushing my head down on the back seat. So I'm laying down. He had taken my nylons off, and he used those to tie my wrists up behind my back. I tried to go along with that and act like it was just normal, like I was enjoying it. He came down on my neck with thumbs like that, and I'm like, I'm screwed. He says, I like it when you swallow. And I don't have any recollection after that. That's when I was out for good. My natural reaction then was to fight, and it just made him push harder. It was a game to him, Barros recalled. It is also important to note that Lori Barros was a sex worker like Little's mother. After Little was done with Lori, he tossed her out of his car and simply drove off. That seems a bit familiar, right? Yes. Little was tossed on the street by his own mother. Explaining this terrible encounter, Lori said that she played dead for 30 minutes before finally getting up because she was afraid that Little was still in the vicinity. She tried to flag down passing drivers, but said that no one wanted to help. Then eventually, she made her way to a phone booth to get her friend to pick her up. In the following hours, her friend picked her up and urged her to file a police report of the incident. That is when Lori reached out to the authorities and explained the incident with Little, the choking, the location, and his car, the Thunderbird. It was exactly 30 days later, I believed, that he had attempted to murder the next girl, in the same place, in the same way, and the police actually caught him in the act. When asked about the reason for opening up about the case now, Lori replied, I owe more to those women than to just run away. San Diego police often patrolled this abandoned lot as it was often used for drugs and prostitution. The police had also read up on the Lori incident and decided to stake out this illegal dump in hopes of finding the suspect. So one night in October, while two police officers, San Diego officer Wayne Spees and his partner Lou Tamangi, were on the lookout for a suspected criminal, they came across a terrible incident. The police saw a Ford Thunderbird parked in the lot and identified the car from the suspected reports. Officer Spees spotted a man of color stepping out from his car, zipping up his pants. They took out their flashlights and went to inspect the car. When the police shed light on the back seat, they were met with an atrocious sight. In the back seat, they found an unconscious, naked black woman, badly beaten, covered in blood all over. That woman was Tanya Jackson. We pulled in, turned on the lights, and there's this black T-Bird, 1976 Ford Thunderbird, that matches our description of Little's car, Officer Spees told the reporters. As soon as our headlights turn on, we see Little's head pop up. He jumps out of the car from the passenger side, and he's waving at us. You can see him just fidgeting with his pants, zipping himself up. We're both out of the car at this point, and I'm telling him, hey, I need to talk to you. Spees continued, but he's just trying to rush us off, like everything is fine. Me and my wife are just parked here having sex, and we're leaving now. But we weren't going to let him walk away without finding out what's really going on. So let's recap. Just a month after the Lori incident, Little was again found in the backseat of his car with yet another unconscious woman. This woman was attacked in the same way, also strangled and assaulted, in the same place as the attempted murder of Lori Barros. Explaining the gruesome incident, the police also stated that when they found the black woman, she had one leg on the seat while the other was on the rear passenger seat. Her head and torso were crammed into the floorboard in the back. She had bruises all over her body, face, and neck, and lips and mouth looked badly punched. Her eyes had rolled back into her skull. The police officer initially thought that the woman was dead. That was until she started gasping and gulping for air. She had a lot of trauma to her face, said Spies. She was very traumatized and afraid of me and my partner because she couldn't see. Fortunately, Tanya survived and, rightfully so, testified against Little. Little was arrested and charged with kidnapping, sexual crimes, and attempted murder. Tanya Jackson was also a sex worker. Little showed no remorse for the woman he had just violated. He mentions that he did not get what he was there for, and she was just playing around. He said that he wouldn't let her go until all of his needs were fulfilled, and that she deserved the beating. According to Little, the woman hoaxed him, and he grabbed her in self-defense. She denied the sexual allegations, but said, "I did kick the shit out of her." In his mind, it was all self-defense, said Spies. They agreed on sex, and she was not giving him what he wanted. He showed no remorse whatsoever. He's actually angry that we interrupted him. He reveals to you exactly who he is and what he's all about. There are no redeeming qualities about Samuel Little, and he's exactly where he needs to be right now, behind bars. Later on, Little indifferently asked the officer, "Did the bitch make it?" Now, you must be thinking that he would have been locked up for years to come, right? Police and prosecutors also thought the same. I mean, the police had caught him red-handed. The police were the witnesses, but yet again, they were wrong. Little was versed in beating such cases. When interrogated during the trial, Little said that the woman was trying to steal his money and duped him. He insisted that in the middle of a consensual sexual transaction, he got into a dispute with the woman and started beating her. And that was his only crime. He kept repeating, "She cheated me, attacked me, and I was fighting her off." These statements were enough for the jury to be conflicted. The jury believed the serial killer over the sex worker. The jury did not want to risk another trial, so they declined to convict Little on these serious charges. Little pleaded guilty to assault charges, and the prosecutors accepted. He was arrested for not one, but 2 attempted murders, and yet did not face any serious consequences. "I was devastated," commented Gary Rampel, working on the case in San Diego County District Attorney's Office. "This is probably the worst guy I ever prosecuted." And so, for some reason, again, in February 1987, Little walks free. Shortly after his release, his first LA victim gets killed. Little then moves to Florida and continues his murder spree, killing more than 10 women. Why wouldn't he? It's not like he was just restricted and put behind bars. It's just insane how Little manages these narrow escapes time and time again. When we arrested him, this was prior to DNA, Spies explained. We were able to take samples from him, but during that time, it wasn't like there was a database where you could submit some DNA and that would connect you to other cases. It's why he was able to go on for so long. In his final interviews with teams of prosecutors, police officials, and defense attorneys, Little stated that he purposefully targeted women that would be easy to miss if they disappeared out of thin air. Women that no one would miss. Women that did not have families. Women that would not be considered credible in court. Women that would not be believed. Women that would not be able to win a case. Women with low IQ. Women with mental health issues. Women that were vulnerable. Women that live on the margins of society. Women of color. Women that were drug addicts. Women that were sex workers. Women that he considered insignificant. Little, as mentioned before, was a boxer. So he would knock out these women with a single punch, strangle them, dump their bodies somewhere, and just skip town. It was like it was a game to him. These women were pawns, and he was the king. But only he won. Both of these women were sex workers, and both of them had testified against him. But just like every organized serial killer, Little knew what he was doing. He managed to get away. He managed to keep killing other women. This investigation brought up another similar case filed nearly a decade previously. Almost 10 years before the LA incident, Little was found in a similar position. On September 1975, the police came across a scene very similar to the one described previously. In broad daylight, just before noon, the officers found a 22-year-old black woman naked, badly beaten, and bruised. The woman had been frantically pounding the back door of a home located in Sunset Hills. She informed the police that she was just headed home from breakfast when she was attacked from behind. A man had grabbed her and wrapped a cord around her neck. She was dragged into a black Chevy Impala and beaten till she passed out. When she regained her senses, she was compelled to perform oral sex and was eventually forcibly taken sexual advantage over. Fortunately for her, the man fell asleep in the car, and grabbing the opportunity, she ran for her life. The police went to check the site given by the woman. Within a short amount of time, they found the car still parked on the road with a black man dozed off in the back seat. But of course, Little denied the sexual crimes and insisted that he had just beaten her because he had gotten furious when the woman suggested a lewd sex act. He claimed that she was a sex worker and that he had paid her $20 for sex and drugs. He did not deny the assault. It was just the sexual crimes that he denied. The police found the black cord and the woman's clothes. Little was charged with sexual crimes and sodomy and was arrested. The woman was willing to testify, but was stated not credible by the prosecutors. The prosecutors mentioned that due to her heroin addiction, she was not likely to be believed by the jurors. The prosecutors feared that they would not win the case. Therefore, keeping in view the circumstances, the prosecutors made a deal. They decided to drop the charges to assault with intent to ravish, considering that Little would plead guilty and accept a 3-month sentence along with a $100 fine. Being the victim of a sexual assault, the woman wanted to keep her identity hidden. The serial killer served 3 months and was free by Christmas. So until now, he had been in court regarding the sexual crimes and attempted murder of 3 women and 2 actual murders. The court knew about these cases, and yet he did not face any serious charges. It is astounding that after all of this, he still manages to commit more murders when he shouldn't have been allowed to see daylight again. But evil had to be stopped at some point. Little's past eventually caught up with him. Not nearly soon enough, but it did. Better late than never, right? Little was arrested for the illegal possession of crack. Detectives tracked Little through his Social Security payments to Louisville in Kentucky. The U.S. Marshals sent a task force for his arrest. September 5th, 2012 marked the day that the evil, sadistic killer got caught in the net. Little was residing in a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky when he was arrested for outstanding drug charges. He was transported to Los Angeles to face the narcotics charges from 2009. By that time, it was normal to collect and use DNA evidence in criminal cases. But what they found from the DNA is staggering. While in custody, Little had his DNA tested, which resulted in his connection to 3 murders between 1987 and 1989. Carol Eileen Elford, July 13th, 1987. Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, September 3rd, 1987. Audrey Nelson Everett, August 14th, 1989. All of these women were killed and dumped on the LA streets, where they were found. The DNA matched the semen on the clothing of 2 of the murder victims and fingerprint marks on the 3rd. This was much larger than the narcotics charges. The police now have DNA evidence. This monster can finally be brought down. Carol Eileen Elford was the first woman Little murdered in South Central LA. Earlier, the 2 female sex workers had already testified against him for sexual crimes and attempted murder. But no serious charges were brought against Little due to insufficient proof. Although Little did serve some time in prison for aggravated assault, he was again let go. After being released from jail, Little returned to his MO, and Elford was his next pawn. She was found dead in an alley on July 13th, 1987. The 41-year-old African-American woman was discovered naked from the waist down, with her shirt pulled up over her bra and wearing only 1 sock. Next to her body were drag marks, suggesting that she was killed somewhere else, dragged, and dumped in the alley. In addition, she had taken multiple injuries, indicating that she was struck on the head and then strangled to death. Elford had bruises on her jawline, in and around her eyes, and hemorrhages. Scratches and abrasions were visible around her neck and back, caused by fingernails. An autopsy revealed that Elford had hemorrhages on her voice box and hyoid bone due to choking. Toxicology reports showed that Elford had consumed alcohol and cocaine before being killed. The DNA found on Elford's bra matched the collected DNA. September 3rd of the same year called for another tragedy. The police officials get another call informing them of a homicide in an abandoned garage. A young boy discovered a 46-year-old woman beaten, killed, and dumped half naked. The woman, identified as Guadalupe Apodaca, was again naked from the waist down, with abrasions to her neck caused by fingernails, bleeding around her eyes, especially the whites of her eyes. She had bruises on her eyes, nose, throat, and neck, a fractured hyoid bone, and larynx. The bruises on her tongue suggested that she had bitten down on it during the seizures she suffered due to the manual strangulation. The internal examination also showed blood in her anal cavity because of sexual assault. Reports also suggested that the woman had ingested drugs and alcohol before her death. The pulled-up clothes contained a DNA-loaded sample of semen that On the 14th of August, 1989, the police get another call. There had been a homicide behind the parking lot of a nightclub in LA. The officers found a Caucasian woman murdered and discarded in the trash like a used, beaten doll. The woman was naked from the waist down with her sweatshirt pulled over her. There were again drag marks around her body, specifically on her back, bottom, and the heels of her feet. She had been murdered somewhere else and dragged to this current spot. This was a 35-year-old woman called Audrey Nelson. The autopsy revealed bruises on the front of her neck and hyoid bone and severe hemorrhaging on her throat muscles. The right side of her neck was covered with some fingernail marks, proving that she had been strangled and choked to death. Audrey had also gone through blunt force trauma. Severe bruising was detected underneath her skin and on her skin, extending to the chest muscles, abdomen, and spine. Further, the reports from the autopsy showed that Audrey was struck in the upper abdomen with such force that it broke her spine. Audrey had, however, fought back for her life. And in her desperation, she had grabbed onto something that finally brought justice to her family and helped put a serial killer behind bars. DNA under her fingernails. The fingernail clipping from her left hand contained particles of blood that matched positively with that of Little's. Audrey, a former burn victim, remained a fighter till the end. In court, Audrey Nelson's daughter Pearl said that her mother was supposed to reunite with her, and Audrey was in LA only to get her life back on track. Little did she know that LA would be where she lost it at the hands of Samuel Little. At the trial, the goddaughter of Guadalupe Apodaca, Mary Frias, expressed to the court that Little had no conscience and no soul. To which he shot back, "I didn't do it." Mary responded, "God will judge you." Tony Zambrano, Apodaca's son, angrily said to Little, "You took something very dear to me. You messed up big time. You hurt my mom." "I didn't do nothing to your mom," Little responded. By now, the police had built a rock-solid case of sexual crimes, assault, and murder against Little. The investigators had a lead in dozens of cold cases from the 1970s to 1990s. The LaPree case was also reopened after Little was charged. On September 2014, Little was tried for the murder of Elford, Apodaca, and Nelson. Little kept denying his charges and maintained his innocence, even on the day of the verdict. Little was found guilty and sentenced in California State Prison to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He kept denying the charges, even interrupting one victim's family member to say that he had not killed anyone. Little read a statement mentioning that he had been convicted based on lying witnesses that were trained by liars. He hoped for a new trial. "The obsession with labeling me a serial killer without any proof," he said, was a legal lynching. 2 of the jurors that were present in the sentencing trial stated that all the evidence against Little was overwhelming, especially the DNA evidence under Nelson's fingernails. Jurors said that they easily reached a verdict within a few hours without being influenced by the serial killer's statements. There was a roar of applause by the victims' families as Little was rolled out of court. The sadist serial killer raised his left fist over his head in response. Pearl Nelson, Audrey Nelson's daughter, who never reunited with her mother, said, "I hope that he rots forever." Come 2018, Little starts getting interrogated by Texas Ranger James Holland. This ranger was known as a serial killer whisperer. The first time Holland met Little, he told him that he was at the prison just for a visit. To coerce a confession out of him, the ranger kept trying to stroke the serial killer's ego, saying that he was a fascinating person that people knew nothing about. He told them that people were interested in finding out about his life. The interviewer made Little believe that he was fond of him by calling him Sammy, which was limited to Little's inner circle. He did not get a confession at first. Holland offered Little a jail setup like a hotel room, with a TV, M&Ms, food from McDonald's, whatever he wished for, including an art studio, as Little liked to draw. He even suggested that he could waive the death penalty for any crimes he confessed to, all in return for telling his story. Holland and Little bonded over time in Texas, liking sodas and nicknames given by their parents. Little grew a liking for Holland. Soon enough, like a pipe waiting to burst, he opened up about his dark side and confessed to the entire sea of his strangulation murders that went on in 19 different states in the timeline of 1970 and 2005. An hour into the meeting, Little admitted to murdering Denise brothers. Following that, the confessions just came pouring out. Little told Holland about his first murder in Houston in 1970 and his last one, Nancy, in 2005. Little stated that he had lost track of the women after number 84, but he, according to his estimates, had murdered around 10 or 20 more. Little always had a wistful smile on his face while recalling the cases, as if he was enjoying reminiscing about the good old days.
Got her out of the car, pulled her out, and drug her into the gross. And we ran into some water running. I turned her loose, and she fell into his face down.
He talked candidly, almost proud of his crimes. This man extinguished and traumatized countless lives, yet he remains indifferent and almost enjoys his storytelling. Little was extensively interviewed by Holland between June 2018 and December 2020. In around 700 hours of interviews, Little provided excruciating details of his victims that only a killer would know. It was incredible how much Little remembered about the incidents. Despite being a senior citizen and having multiple health issues, Little remembered each and every excruciating detail. He remembered what his victims looked like, their skin color, how tall they were, how much they weighed, what they were wearing, and the things that they said. He could recall how he met each victim, how he killed them, where he killed them, and where he dumped them. He sometimes got fuzzy about the dates and names, but other than that, remarkable recollection. Even after multiple decades, it was like he kept his victims with him. Little liked to draw. The Texas Ranger who interviewed Little noticed this tendency and provided him with art supplies behind bars. He had a sufficient artistic ability to reproduce the victims' faces. Along with the confessions, Little produced a series of colored drawings of more than 30 of his victims. His paintings and sketches showed that he had a photographic memory. The police officials hoped that the sketches would help match the confessions of unidentified victims, but he only drew the face and the neck of the victim. That checks out with his obsession with necks. One of the portraits helped solve a cold case in Akron, Ohio. I say, if I can help get someone out of jail, then God might smile a little bit more on me, he said. While some criminals tend to exaggerate their crimes, Little's confessions were found to be extremely credible. His confessions astounded the investigators. Nothing he's ever said has been proven to be wrong or false, stated Holland. There was a murder case that contained no physical evidence, but Little mentioned the woman's last meal. The autopsy report showed stomach contents that matched Little's confession. One of the cases was solved after Little mentioned that the victim wore dentures. Another killing was solved by Little stating that he killed the victim near some unusual looking arches in Florida. He remembers one victim as being 25 years, having blue eyes, short blonde hair, and a hippie look. This man had murdered almost 100 women. Since then, it has been clear. This was the deadliest serial killer that the United States had ever seen. This killer was nicknamed the Choke and Stroke Murderer. On November 13th, the Texas District Attorney and Wise County, Texas Sheriff's Office announced that Little had confessed to dozens of murders and committed more than 90 murders across many states. On November 15th, 2018, Little confessed to the murder of Brenda Alexander in Alabama in 1979, the strangling of an unidentified woman in 1982, and the strangling of 18-year-old Fredonia Smith. On November 19th, 2018, Little confessed to many murders, including the killing of Julia Critchfield in 1978. He had strangled the 36-year-old Julia and thrown her off a cliff. On the same day, Little also confessed to the murder of 19-year-old Evelyn Weston, whose body was found earlier in 1978 near Fort Jackson. 20-year-old Rosie Hill in Florida in 1982, and 26-year-old Nancy Carroll in Tupelo in 2005. The killer confessed to the killing of a woman in Cleveland in 1977 or 1978. She was found in Willoughby Hills, Ohio on March 18th. The unidentified woman was black and between the ages of 17 and 35. The body was discovered dumped down a grassy slope near a wooded area with fence around it. A man that was walking his dog nearby discovered the body. The only remains on the body were the skeleton, some jewelry, and some clothing. The faces, names, and tragedies go on and on. Little traveled all over the nation in different cars that he lived in. This made it difficult to track him and recognize his killing pattern. He stole for a living and was partially financed by Social Security benefits, collected via prepaid Walmart cards. Whenever he was in the mood, Little chose his victim. We already know that Little preyed on women living on society's edge, such as drug addicts or prostitutes. Little killed his victims in circumstances that left very few telltale marks. When Little started pouring out the confessions, he confessed that his first murder was in Miami in 1970 of a 33-year-old woman named Mary Brosley. The alcoholic mother of two was driven across Route 27 by Little, where he strangled her, eventually killing her. While talking to the investigator, the serial killer mentioned that he had a strong desire to choke her and went out of control. Mary had been dead for weeks before being discovered. A man and his teenage boy were out hunting when they came across a shallow grave. They found a woman's body that had no ID and was beyond recognition. Any physical clues had been degraded. The reports found a high amount of alcohol in her system and pronounced the case suspicious. They said it was possible that she simply dropped dead of alcohol poisoning, even though someone had clearly dug the ground and buried the body. It was not labeled as a homicide. On November 2018, in Opelousas, Louisiana, Little confessed to another murder from January 1996. A 24-year-old Melissa Thomas was found dead under a pecan tree in the cemetery of a Baptist church. Little told the investigators that he met Melissa on the streets and headed to the cemetery together to do drugs. Little took her to his car and they moved into the back seat for sex. Little became attracted to her neck and began stroking it. Little mentioned that Melissa commented, "Why do you keep touching my neck? Are you a serial killer?" Little did not like that, and this got him fuming, and consequently, he strangled the woman to death. During the investigation, the detectives learned that Little was very familiar with the town of Opelousas, including its streets, bars, and cemeteries. Another one of the confessions matched the murder of Brenda Alexander. On August 26, 1979, a 23-year-old woman was strangled, beaten, and killed in Phoenix City, Alabama. Her body was discovered naked with the exception of a Timex watch. It was dumped in a wooded area. The predator had met Alexander at a dance club in Columbus. They got acquainted and left the nightclub together. Samuel strangled and bruised her as they got in the car, taking her life. The police captain gave out a hint of the serial killer's demeanor as he was describing getting his victim into his car. He wringed his hands together, smiled, and said, "I knew she was mine." After his confessions, now there was an overwhelming amount of evidence against Little. The police had evidence and testimonies from attack survivors. Detective Roberts and her partner detectives started opening up other cold cases, working on each piece of evidence, peeling back the onion one layer at a time. the serial killer's monstrous history. In many cases, the officials managed to connect the serial killer to previous cases of brutal sexual crimes, assaults, and murders. The serial killer believed for decades that he would not be caught, as no one accounted for his victims. Little targeted people living on the margins of society, and told the investigators, "I'm not going to go over there in the white neighborhood and pick out a little young teenage girl." Many opportunities to bring Little to justice, to put a stop to this killing, were wasted. The indifference and bias of the justice system are apparent in this case, and for so many people, it cost them their lives. Police Lieutenant Darren Versiga, who worked on cold cases, confirmed that the victim's race and profession did, in fact, play a part. If you were an African American female and you were in the process of any kind of prostitution or illegal stuff, we just did not treat those crimes as crimes, to be perfectly honest with you, testified the lieutenant in court. Southern Mississippi, 2014. The journalist, Jillian Lauren, that coerced the confessions out of Little, became somehow acquainted with the murderer. Little told the journalist, "I never killed no senators or governors or fancy New York journalists. Nothing like that." Referring to Lauren, he continued, "I killed you. It'd be all over the news. I stayed in the ghetto." He concluded that the murder cases of such women would be less cared for by the justice system. He was not like other serial killers that we talked about. They eventually showed remorse for their victims, not Samuel Little. Investigators had to do a lot of digging into cold cases to match these findings. Little's attacks were neither about death nor assault. It was all about power to him. He liked to control these women, controlling their breathing, overpowering them, controlling whether they live or die. He liked to play God. He got off watching these women in pain, struggling to breathe, going in and out of consciousness. He lured in women with an offer of cash and drugs. Once they were drawn in, the former boxer attacked them, striking a thunderous blow that would knock out their senses. After he was done, he would just discard the bodies, half naked in the trash, like a used store mannequin. Little showed absolutely no remorse for his victims. During the sexual aspect of the assault, Little kept the woman conscious, expressing that he liked holding the victims in his arms while they cried. The choke and stroke murderer would use one hand to strangle the victim and the other hand to please himself. Little got pleasure from dragging out the killing process, prolonging the victim's suffering. Investigators stated that the beating these women took was so brutal that one autopsy showed that a victim was struck with a force so powerful it broke her spine. The bodies would be found long after the time of death, when the signs of strangulation would have gone, and nothing but bones would remain. While talking to the journalist Lauren, Little specified that no one could understand the love he had in his heart for his babies. No, the serial killer is not talking about any children he had. He is referring to the women he executed. Little told her that he adored all of his babies. He said, "I like to kiss and hug them, you know, and love them." According to him, the only thing that made him feel alive in the black hole was thinking about these women. Day after day, he would tell the journalist and go back to all the killings, drawing them out from his memory. "How did it feel to kill them?" the journalist asked. "Ooh-ee. It felt like heaven, felt like being in bed with Marilyn Monroe." Little mentioned that as a child, he did not think about women as humans that ate, slept, and went to the toilet. In his mind, women were angels. He chose women whose eyes were already half dead. According to Little, these women had been waiting for him to appear and finish the job, and he was doing them a favor. Little considered himself an angel of mercy, sent by God to euthanize. The other times, he believed himself to be possessed by the devil. Accessible, weak, and attractive, the category most chosen by serial killers. And Samuel Little had gotten his perfect one: sex workers. They were accessible, attractive, and weak. This sick man was a sexual sadist that knew exactly what he was doing. They was broke and homeless, and they walked right into my spider web, Little said in 2019. Samuel Little came to the end of his murdering career in 2012 when he was arrested for the murder of 3 California women in the late 1980s. Little confessed to killing 93 women between 1970 and 2005. Many of Little's victims remain unidentified, with only faces known through the color sketches made by the killer. Little died at 80 on Wednesday, December 30th, 2020, in a California hospital while serving 3 life sentences. Just because Little confessed to all of these murders does not mean each of them was closed. There had been many Jane Does in America that could never be linked to any perpetrator. Most of the victims were not declared as homicides either. They were tagged as overdoses or accidental deaths. These cases were written off despite the clear signs of physical and sexual assault and manual strangulation, just because they were in the sex industry or had drugs in their system. The police officials had taken an unorthodox step of posting the serial killer's confessions along with the colored sketches on the internet in hopes of getting leads on the unidentified women and giving the families of the victims some closure. Almost half of Little's victims resided in the southeast at the time of the killings, and many of these cases remain open, partly due to the victims being Jane Does and partly due to the cases being unmatched. The FBI is still working to connect Samuel Little's confessions to the killings that occurred throughout the United States. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Samuel Little. And why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.